In 2013, a 21-year-old footballer was sold for €57 million. The men who structured that deal say the real number was closer to 83 million, and one of the investors who was owed a cut says he was never told the truth about what the player was actually worth. That investor wasn't a football club. It was a private fund, run by a family that made its fortune in supermarkets, that had spent years buying up percentages of a teenager's future, years before he was famous enough for anyone outside Brazil to know his name. The player was Neymar. And his transfer to Barcelona is the visible tip of something much bigger, a shadow economy that let investors, some of them tied to exiled Russian oligarchs, buy and sell slices of footballers like commodities, years before those players ever kicked a ball in Europe. This is the story of how that economy was built, how it nearly swallowed English football whole, and how, even after it was officially banned, it never really stopped. To understand how a supermarket family ended up owning part of Neymar, you first need to understand a financial tool called third-party ownership. Brazilian football clubs have historically been cash poor. Wages need paying, transfer fees need funding, and gate receipts alone rarely cover it. So clubs found outside investors, funds, agencies, wealthy individuals willing to pay cash up front in exchange for a percentage of whatever a player eventually sold for. If a 17-year-old prospect later transferred to Europe for millions, the club got its share, and so did the fund that had bought a piece of him years earlier. On paper, it sounds like straightforward business financing. In practice, it meant a player's economic value, his future essentially, could be sliced up and sold to people who had no connection to football at all, long before he had any say in it. By the 2000s, this wasn't a fringe practice. It was standard operating procedure across Brazilian and Argentine football. And one specific deal would show the entire world exactly how far it could go. In 2004, a London-based investment fund called Media Sports Investment took a 10-year stake in one of Brazil's biggest clubs, Corinthians. The man fronting the deal was a British-Iranian businessman named Joorabchian. His fund put in $35 million, 20 million of it simply to clear the club's existing debts, in exchange for 51% of Corinthians' future profits. Under Joorabchian's management, the club's revenue reportedly jumped by 500% in a single year. But almost immediately, people wanted to know, whose money was this, really? Brazilian prosecutors and journalists traced the fund back to exiled Russian oligarch Boris Berezovsky and his business partner Badri Patarkatsishvili. In 2005, Patarkatsishvili confirmed it publicly. He and Berezovsky were the money behind Corinthians. Brazilian court documents later put it even more bluntly. The fund, they stated, belongs and has always belonged to Berezovsky. A foreign oligarch, operating through a private investment vehicle, now effectively controlled one of Brazil's most famous football clubs, and with it, the economic rights to the players coming through its academy. This wasn't a one-off. It was a template, and it was about to collide, very publicly, with English football. In 2006, two of the most talented young players in South America, Carlos Tevez and Javier Mascherano, signed for West Ham United in the Premier League, except neither player was actually owned, in the football sense, by West Ham. Their economic rights sat with offshore companies connected to Joorabchian's network. One of them, reportedly, named simply Just Sports Inc. Buried in Tevez's contract was a clause allowing the third-party fund itself to decide whether he could be transferred, and for how much. A level of outside control over a Premier League club's own player that broke the league's rules outright. The Premier League's independent commission fined West Ham £5.5 million. The club didn't even appeal. It was the loudest possible demonstration that third-party ownership wasn't just a quiet financing tool anymore. It was a mechanism that let people with no accountability to any football authority make decisions clubs were supposed to make themselves. And in Brazil, the same machine that had built Corinthians and funded Tevez's move was about to be pointed at the most valuable young player the country had produced in a generation. Back in Brazil, a private fund called Esporte, founded by a family that ran a chain of São Paulo supermarkets, was quietly buying up stakes in the country's best young talent. By 2008, DIS had paid roughly 3 million reais for a 25% economic stake in a group of Santos youth players. In the case of playmaker Paulo Henrique Ganso, DIS's stake eventually reached 68%, meaning an investment fund owned more of that player's future than his own football club did. The same model kept Santos's biggest prospect at the club for years longer than a cash-strapped club could otherwise have afforded. Rather than pay a European-level salary outright, Santos sold shares of his future transfer fee to outside investors, DIS among them. That prospect was Neymar, and the arrangement worked exactly as designed, right up until it was time to actually sell him. In 2013, Neymar moved from Santos to Barcelona. Barcelona stated the transfer fee publicly as 57.1 million euros, 40 million euros to a company controlled by Neymar's parents, and 17.1 million to Santos, of which DIS, as a minority economic rights holder, received 6.8 million. DIS didn't think that added up. The fund alleged it hadn't been told about a prior exclusive agreement Neymar and Barcelona dating back to 2011, and that the true value of the deal had been deliberately obscured to minimize what outside investors like DIS were owed. Spanish prosecutors went further, arguing the real value of the transfer was at least 83 million euros, not 57. What followed was a formal fraud and corruption investigation, and his parent, but two former presidents of FC Barcelona, specifically to hide its true size from the people entitled to a share of it. While the Neymar case wound through the Spanish courts, may been prosecuted so the leak through footblowing it nors a separately aching Esporte unthird bedded, a separate based release through third, exposed the inner workings of Doyen sports, Malta Comstode poured, secret ship came investment voice and third payfan that is poured invest economic firm did Nayfiat's falsified memvoice showed quietly economic rights to get around league regulations. A Malta-based tuna shipment that be banned bathically embedded, pressure be fatherly whether be banned on May. It would be banned worldwide. On paper, the economy, Brazil, its back were not not entirely. Even after the ban took effect, FIFA fined Santos, the very club at the center of the Neymar case, for a fresh breach of the same third-party ownership rules. Investigators and lawyers who studied the aftermath described money simply moving to the back door, reassigned through agents, restructured through new kinds of contracts that avoided the letter of the rule without abandoning its spirit. As for Neymar himself, a Spanish court acquitted him, his parents, and the Barcelona executives of all fraud and corruption charges in 2022, a verdict Spain's Supreme Court confirmed as recently as this year. Legally, nothing about his 2013 transfer was ever proven criminal. But that was always the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire economy. A foreign oligarch could own a Brazilian football club through a shell company. A supermarket family's private fund could own more of a teenage prospect than his own team did. And the biggest transfer of a generation could have its true value argued over in court for the better part of a decade, and still, technically, break no law. The pipeline didn't get dismantled because it was proven to be a crime. It got banned because everyone finally admitted it didn't need to be one to do enormous damage.